You're listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. At the SMP, we embrace the Stoic principle of the obstacle is the way, or that we can take the hardest things in our lives and use them as a way to learn and grow into the best versions of ourselves. If you're here, you're likely a growth-oriented parent of a young person who's choosing to navigate the world through a trans identity. I'm Stoic Mom, a life coach and educator who is also a growth-oriented parent of an adult trans-identified daughter. I've committed to having guests on this podcast who bring messages of healing. I invite professionals who I believe have expertise that can help you regain solid ground and reframe this circumstance in a way that supports you to learn and grow from it. I also invite other parents who found healthy ways to navigate this destabilizing circumstance, whose stories and strategies may inspire you. Today's guest is one of these parents. I hope you can find value in healing ideas from our conversation. You and I connected originally. You were actually one of the founding members of the SMP Community Center.
That's right. I had been reading your blog for a while. In fact, I went back and tried to remember what was the one post that you had that really captured my attention. And I remember it was the one named "Grant Me the Serenity"
Mm,
with the Serenity Prayer and the CTFAR self-coaching model.
that was an early one. That
Yeah,
was
that
that was.
I think that was like almost 2 years ago. So I had been kind
Mhm.
of reading your blog for a while, and then you posted that you were starting a new group, and it just felt like the right time. I had been kind of struggling on my own and making progress and growing, but I felt like I needed a little bit more support and somebody to kind of walk with me through this process in a way that I hadn't had up until that point.
Mm, mhm. Yeah. So that puts us in community, right? Like you and I have now known each other for, like you said, well, I guess it'd be about a year and a half because the group started in late 2022. Um, and I think that what I'm really trying to encourage moms to do is to reorient to the problem, and so it sounds, I get the sense from what you're saying that you already had that intuition about that. I don't know that there's a whole lot of resources out there that are supporting moms to do that. I think it can be difficult to communicate what that means, what that looks like. And that's really what inspired me to be persistent in getting you on.
Oh,
Because I think you really recognize that and can really articulate what that process was like, what it felt like before, maybe versus what it feels like now in a way that other moms can hear and resonate with. And so I just my deepest gratitude for agreeing to do this. I know it's a vulnerable thing to do. And I just appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom and the courage it takes to do that. So thank you.
well, thank you for asking me and having me on. I'm honored. And if anything in my story can be helpful to others, then I'm happy to share.
And as we were setting this conversation up, one of the things that you said to me was, I think moving from resistance to acceptance was a big part of the growth process for me.
I do remember what it felt like in the beginning. I remember in Lisa Marciano's book on motherhood, she talks about the feminine hero's journey is
Mm,
like falling down. And that's what it felt like the ground opened up under my feet and I was just in free fall. Like everything that I thought I knew about my daughter and about our family and about myself and my role, it just in the blink of an eye, it was just gone. And that feeling is so disorienting and destabilizing. And frankly terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in those early days, it was just trying to find something to hold on to just to stop the fall, you know. And so I did what moms do, parents do. I went into research mode and really tried to just reorient myself and figure out what in the world was going on. Because like a lot of moms, I was just completely blindsided. We were sort of percolating along in our little family and doing our thing, and of course, it was the middle of COVID, so that looked very different from, what our normal lives pre-COVID looked like. But, we were sort of doing what everybody else was doing, muddling along and doing the best we could in the middle of a very already destabilizing, set of circumstances. And then,
Mm-hmm.
to have this happen, just was even more destabilizing. So it was just a process in the beginning of trying to figure out what was going on in culture, the context, where this all came from, what trans even means. And that was just a long process, months and months of research. I did what other moms do. I got my PhD in gender studies,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But at some point, it just got to where um, I felt like I needed. It's like I knew enough to understand the situation, but I needed a direction. Um, so much of the focus in a lot of parent support groups, and they're wonderful in their way and great, and I was grateful for those, at least in terms of education and connection with other parents and feeling like you're not alone. That's
Mm-hmm.
huge.
Mm-hmm.
But so much of the focus is on doing everything you can do to get your child to desist.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand and I feel that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a natural impulse, the impulse to help, to fix, to solve the problem, to prevent your child from doing something, that's going to harm them immediately, but also down the road in the future. I mean, all of that, those are very natural impulses, and we all
Mm-hmm.
feel that way. At the same time, it can be very disempowering because you are placing so much of your own energy into getting somebody else to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not really something that you can control. Um, and when you have that energy coming into your relationship with your child, um, it changes the dynamic. It changes your relationship in a way. It creates a tension and a conflict. And my child is on this side and I'm on this side, and we're pulling and pushing against each other. And that's just not, for me anyway, that wasn't working. It was just
How did you know it wasn't working?
because I didn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sleeping,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't eating. I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with my heart pounding. I wouldn't be able to go
Mm-hmm.
back to sleep. And then all day I would just have so much anxiety. And then, I'd finally fall asleep at night out of just sheer exhaustion, maybe get 3 or 4 hours, and then wake up in a jolt and have it all start all over again. And, so much of my time during the day, I was, reading and researching and trying to, get my mind around what was going on, not just with my daughter, but, with kids in general and culture more broadly. And it was a lot.
Can I ask how that affected the way you showed up in relationship with your daughter and how she responded to the state you were in?
My daughter's very perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think when I am not at ease, she picks up on that very easily.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I was telegraphing to her in my not verbally, not out loud, but
Right.
a way that she was able to pick up on that something was wrong, that she was doing something wrong, that there was something in what she was doing that was making me afraid and anxious. Um,
Hmm.
Part of what you're dealing with too is when kids are reading things and watching videos where parents are being painted as transphobic or, um, unsupportive or unloving, you know, they come into their interactions with you kind of looking for that. And so even when you're not trying
Hmm.
to be that way or you don't feel that way, your concerns or your worries or your fears or your anxieties or your desire to fix or change or not accept, they read that in a certain way, that just contributes to, um, this push pull
Hmm.
conflict, even if it's not, um, an outward conflict. If you're not having arguments all day, there's still this tension that you're holding in your relationship. And I just, I didn't feel like we were going to make any progress if we stayed stuck in that dynamic. Something had to shift.
Hmm.
And I remember, um, I forget when it was, but you recommended or talked about Viktor Frankl's book, Man's
Hmm.
Search for Meaning. And there's a really great quote in there. He says, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves."
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and that's where I that kind of encapsulates the shift in myself, because I couldn't necessarily change the situation on her side of things, but I could change how I showed up. And when you wrote that post, "Grant me the serenity," the serenity prayer, I remember my grandmother had a little plaque of that hanging on her wall. So when I was growing up and I just learned to read, I remember seeing that plaque and reading it. So, um, that idea of being serene in the face of things that we can't change,
Hmm.
um, having courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That just set me on a path to really start thinking, okay, what can I change? How do I find the courage to change those things? And how do I live in a space in this moment where I can be serene and telegraph that to my daughter and not pretend to be serene, right? Not pretend to be calm,
Hmm.
but to actually be that, and to show her that I trust her, I trust myself, I trust this process, that we're going to get through this together, and then it's going to be okay.
Yeah, if I might, one of your goals in coaching was to become the mom your daughter needed you to be. And so that's what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
This inspired in you was to shift that focus away from trying to make this circumstance that was creating so much discomfort in you go away, which I
Mm-hmm.
think, again, like you said, it's a very normal impulse. And I think that's where we all start out. That's part of that pursuit of information or the research, and I call it the pursuit. That's what Rose would call it from our Attachment Matters series.
Mm-hmm.
She would say that is an attachment instinct. when we go into pursuit of that information, um, to ease our own discomfort. When we do that, it's interesting though how we are. You talk about your daughter's attunement to you, or she perceives you, right? And you're telegraphing messages to her, not with your words, but with how you are showing up. And so recognizing, that's what I'm hearing too, is recognizing what you want to model for her and what you want to telegraph. I love that word. What do you want to telegraph to her about what is happening right now? Do you want to telegraph your anxiety and fear, and what message does she receive about herself if that's what's being telegraphed versus what is being telegraphed if you are calm and composed and not just faking the faith,
Right.
but feeling it, like really having faith in your capacity and her capacity to move through this. Yeah. Um, you know, one thing, one thing that moms, I think, deal with, I dealt with it. So many of the moms I work with deal with this particular um, difficulty is the name, right? Is when our child starts using another name and what we feel in our bodies when we hear that name. Um, and you and I have agreed that I can share some things out of your graduation exercise. So one thing I have clients do when they are working with me and think that they're ready to graduate from coaching is to reflect on where they were coming in and how things have changed for them. And you included a paragraph about the name and about imbuing things with too much power. So I'm gonna read this and let you respond to it. You said one thing I've come to realize in working with you is that I have a tendency to imbue certain things with too much power. And then because I've made them so powerful in my mind, I then approach them with anxiety, fear, or dread. And I've realized I do this with a lot of things. For example, in my mind, I made my daughter's preferred name a symbol of everything I fear and even recoil from in gender ideology. Once I realized I could change my thoughts about her preferred name, the name no longer had that power over me. I still don't like it, but I can hear it and see it without the massive wave of anxiety, fear, and dread washing over me, which also kind of speaks to what you were saying about Viktor Frankl,
Mm-hmm.
and that we have power over the meaning we make of things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you speak a little more about that shift when it came to the name your daughter had chosen and the impact it had on you?
Yeah, I think it became a symbol, um, a convenient symbol of everything that I was afraid of. Um, and I can remember being in situations where she was using the name and other people were calling her by that name, and that feeling of just like a wave that would come
Hmm.
over me.
Hmm.
And I guess it's like that fight, flight, freeze response. It's just a visceral physical reaction to it because of what it represented. Um, you know, Part of what I think I realized too is, you know, as parents, we approach these problems as adults with, our perspective and all of our concerns and our awareness of all of these things. And sometimes it's also helpful to remember that our kids aren't thinking about it in the same way. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
the same thing to them.
Right.
It doesn't carry the weight to them that it does to us.
Mm-hmm.
And just that awareness that the meaning that we assign, and it could be anything. It could be the haircut, it could be the clothing, it could be, the name or the pronouns, or, what they
Mm-hmm.
have on their social media profile picture. I mean, it's the way that we elevate those things and make them so much bigger than they are can add, I think, unnecessarily to our distress. It doesn't mean we have to like it. It's okay to say, gosh, I really hate my kid's haircut right now. That's
Mm-hmm.
okay. You don't necessarily have to tell your kid that, but it's okay to feel that way. But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that your child is going to run out the door and, you know, medically transition or do something, that you're really worried about. I think a lot of it too is their efforts to individuate using the tools that are available to them in our current context. I think living so much of their lives online makes it so much easier to experiment with identity rather than go out into the world and try new things and um, have new experiences. It's so much easier to just play with identity in a safe space online where you can change your name with a click of a mouse,
Mm-hmm.
versus going out into the real world. So I think sometimes, because we didn't grow up with that, those changes that they're making in those spaces where it's easier to do so carry more weight than maybe they really need to for us. You know?
Yeah, you said elevate. I'm going to choose a little stronger word and say escalate. That sometimes the power that we give those things that you called symbols, and I think that's exactly what they become, the haircut, the name, the clothes, whatever it is for you that uh, triggers that fear. In that fear, we tend to escalate all those feelings along with oftentimes the conflict or the separation that we are experiencing in our relationship with our child. And so being mindful of that and recognizing what that does to the relationship, I think is so important, and that it doesn't have to mean what we've made it mean. You said it's easier to play with identity, which is what adolescents do,
Mm-hmm.
right? I love that you chose the word play. They play with their identity. And when we give those things so much power, in some ways, well, let's use that word telegraph again. What are we telegraphing to them in the anxiousness that creates for us? We tend to make it more serious. Um, you were also talking about um, the stories our kids have of us and how that anxiety and stuff plays into what their story is. That um, I wanted to reference this I mean, it's a psychological phenomenon, and now I feel like I've heard it called several different things, but it really is the self-fulfilling prophecy is the easiest term that most people have heard before for that pull that somebody else is going to have on you, that we are going to act into their story of us. And so if our kids have a story of us as being transphobic, or bigoted, and our behavior, they're looking for us basically to make that story true, because that's what we tend to do. We make our stories about the people in our lives true. And so they're kind of unconsciously scanning for evidence that that's who we are. And so resisting that pull is really challenging. I'm wondering if you have like some tips and strategies for how you resist that pull.
For me, my focus early on, even in the early days when I was really just afraid and feeling very anxious and kind of coming into this whole situation from a place of fear. Um, I was pretty conscious of wanting to make all of those stories about parents look like a lie.
Hmm.
And I knew that I couldn't just do that with my words.
Hmm.
I had to show up. I had to do it with my actions. I had to be present. Um, Even when she was cranky or grumpy or asking for things that I couldn't say yes to, even when we were setting boundaries, um, just continuing to do that from a place of love and just showing up. Sometimes it was like little things like if she wanted to come in, I work at home, so if she wanted to come in and talk to me, I would literally stop everything I was doing, physically turn my body toward her and make eye contact and pay attention, and just through my body language, really just telegraph to her, there's that word again.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
are important to me. I
Hmm.
care what you think. I care what you have to say. I want to hear what you have to say, and I'm giving you my full attention. And just doing that over and over and over again, day after day after day after day. And it's amazing how when you do that to your child, even if your child is hearing these things in culture and being told, well, your parents don't care, your parents don't love you, if they don't do this and this and this thing, then it means this and this and this, just trying to do what you can to make that look like a lie. And another thing that we did is I found an activity that we could do together no matter what, even if she wasn't feeling good, even if in those early days when things were so intense. um, and for us it was going to pet stores and
Hmm.
taking an interest in animals. And we already had a cat and dog, and she took an interest in reptiles. So we would go to pet stores, every pet store in town, and we would visit all the reptiles. And then it became, well, let's research together about reptiles. And, if we were to get one as a pet, what would it be? What would that look like? How would we take care of it? What kind of enclosure does it need? And it just became something that had absolutely nothing to do with gender or identity or mental health or COVID or being stuck at home, because this was in early, 21. We weren't even, things weren't even open yet. And we were, going out into public carefully and,
Hmm.
and, doing this. And it became something that we could do together and look forward to. And, now we have some reptiles in the house, and it's being willing to get out of your comfort zone and not just pretend that the thing that is important to your child is important to you, but to really feel that way and to do the work on yourself so that you can show up in that space very sincerely, um, because they see that.
Hmm.
Like, I want to go to the pet store with you. Yes, let's go buy crickets, and feed them
Hmm.
to the pets. In fact, a few weeks ago, she's older now, 17, and she's starting to be able to reflect on things over the past several years and recognize and realize kind of what I was doing in a way.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
she told me not too long ago, she said, "Thank you. Thank you for being open to this and taking an interest in these animals and doing this with me. I really appreciate you doing this, because I used to joke that, when you decide to have a baby, you have this picture in your mind of what it's going to be like. And then all of these things happen that you don't anticipate and you never imagined you'd be doing. And, feeding a dead mouse to a snake was definitely not on my list of things that I thought I would be doing when I brought home that lovely little baby from the hospital. But anyway, just that would be my advice to parents is, how can you show up for your child every single day in a way that is sincere, that
Mm.
that shows them, not with your words, but with your actions and your body language and your expression, that shows them that they matter to you, that no matter how they're feeling, how they're identifying, what aspects of your values that they're challenging or testing the boundaries of, that okay, that's okay, this is normal, but you're important to me no matter what. And I want to spend time with you and I want to do fun things with you. And then just continuing to do that. We've gone kayaking, horseback riding, hiking. We have family movie nights together. One thing we started doing early on was, it was COVID, it was 2020. We didn't have anything else to do. So we cooked meals and had every single dinner together. And there were times when she didn't really want to do that, but we did it anyway.
Mm.
And I would look for topics of conversation, that I knew would engage her, even if it engaged sort of the angry side of her a little bit. Like if there was something, a politician said or something in the news that I thought would at least get her engaged and out of silence and into talking and sharing her thoughts and ideas. And then just creating a space for her to do that and feel safe doing that. It's little things like that, just building gradually over, months, really, months and even years.
I'm excited to share that this episode of Conversations Along the Way is sponsored by Dream School, which is brought to you by the same three psychoanalysts who bring you the podcast This Jungian Life. For those who may not know, Lisa Marciano, author of the book Motherhood and one of the founders of Therapy First, is also one of the co-hosts of This Jungian Life. Those who've been following the Stoic Mom Project since its early days in the spring of 2022 know that this Jungian Life podcast inspired me to start paying attention to the symbolism and meaning in my dreams. As a result, around my daughter's 18th birthday, I had a series of dreams that brought me much comfort and peace around trusting both her journey and the foundation we had provided her. I've continued to spend time pondering my dreams and researching the symbols that appear and basically just hoping that I'm, air quotes, doing it right. I finally gave myself the gift of Dream School last fall and can already say it's inspired huge transformation in my life. It quickly deepened my appreciation for the wisdom my dreams offer me and increased my drive to learn more about Jungian philosophy and how I can use it to strengthen my coaching skill set. So not only do you learn how to, as they say, decode the language of metaphor and symbol and harness the power of your unconscious wisdom, if you engage fully in Dream School, you'll learn quite a bit about Jung's ideas around human development over the lifespan, including his concept of individuation, a process that we're all invited to do in midlife that, well, adds more life to the rest of our lives. I could go on and on about the value of consciously engaging in our own midlife individuation process, but I'll save that for my posts on the Stoic Mom Project and my work in helping clients navigate their own unique individuation journey. If you're interested in Dream School and what it might inspire in you, you can use the code STOICMOM15 at checkout for 15% off Dream School tuition. That's Stoic Mom in all caps, followed by the digits 15. Now let's get back to that conversation. So much of what you just described reinforces what we've been talking about on attachment matters. So I'm just going to pick up some of that and reinforce it for the audience. But that shared interest and the genuineness, of the shared interest, truly finding something you can be curious about that your child is also interested in goes such a long way for reinforcing that connection and making that story untrue. The one that they're being fed about who we are, it's hard to hang on to that if all the evidence is to
Mhm.
the contrary. If you're not just in constant conflict about this identity thing, but the focus is on these other things that connect you.
Mhm.
Um, and how challenging that can be. I think it's important to recognize that they are often behaving in ways that aren't inviting, that are literally repelling. And it can be hard to keep showing up in a way that telegraphs, I enjoy your company. You matter. You use that word even, you matter to me, which is one of those, I think it's the fourth um, level of attachment according to Neufeld, right? Is that significance and you matter to me. And you even mentioned the values, that even when we disagree, or even when I am not living up to the things that you value, right? This is from the child's perspective. You still love me. I still matter. And how important that is to their maturation. They need that from us, from their moms. You also said showing up in this way, even if she was grumpy. I think this is a trap we fall into. We take that grumpiness personally and we mirror them. And again, just comes naturally. This is the world we've grown up in. And if we're if we're recognizing, I think, the invitation here, then anytime we experience that, it becomes an opportunity for us to build our own capacity, to catch ourselves in that mirroring state, recognize what's happening, and turn the tables, because they'll mirror us too. Have you experienced that? That when you're able to stay present, not get caught up in that mirroring snowball, does your daughter shift and mirror you?
Usually, it's it's a little bit like holding space,
Hmm.
creating space. We've talked about, building a container.
Hmm.
And sometimes, you know, the struggle from the parents' point of view is, okay, well, I would really like the container to be this big, and it's kind of smallish, but
Hmm.
that's too constraining. So you need to develop your comfort level with, making the container large enough so that your child can sort of safely bang around in there
Hmm.
and you can continue to hold that space. And what I find is that when I do that and I don't react, I'm just essentially non-reactive. I'm
Hmm.
not feeding, my energy isn't feeding her energy. And without that fuel, it just kind of fizzles out. It's really
Hmm.
hard for her to maintain that and without me feeding it. And I know you've spoken to Maggie. My husband and I actually talked with her. We had a consultation with her in the summer of 21, and she gave some great advice. She said it was about reinforcement, and she said that when your child is showing up in a way that is not helpful, or you would really rather not encourage or not engage, of course, you don't want to feed into it with any kind of a positive reinforcement, but you also don't want to feed into it with negative reinforcement, because even if you're reacting negatively, you're still feeding, you're still feeding energy into that. So if you can just be non-reactive, that just creates a space for her to feel what she's feeling, but you're not extending it beyond just this little burst of whatever she's feeling in that moment. And sometimes that's really hard. I mean, there were times where she would come at me where she was really kind of trying to provoke me and
Mhm.
pick a fight
Mhm.
and say, well, you're not doing this, or you won't do that, or you won't give me this, or you won't give me that. And, it's hard because you want to defend yourself. You want to react, you want to respond. And to just hold that space and say, well, I'm sorry you're hurting, or I'm sorry you're upset. And then sometimes if I didn't have anything to say, I would just kind of look at her,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and just because that was the best I could do in that moment.
Mhm.
I'm like, I literally cannot think of anything to say, so I'm just going to look at you and love you. And
Mhm.
she would sometimes storm off in a huff, but just not feeding into that conflict was really important. And then the flip of that is when you do see things that your child is doing, whether she's trying something new or she's growing or she's working extra hard and on an assignment in school, or she comes to you and wants to share something, you know, really just opening up and
Mhm.
responding positively and with love.
Mhm.
you know, it may seem a little bit manipulative, but I don't mean it to be that way. I think as parents, it's kind of our job to encourage
Mhm.
healthy, beneficial, connection, those qualities that we um, think are, or that we believe are going to benefit our children. I mean, that's what we do. And I remember not too long ago, um, I was going to bed and I was really sleepy. And she came in to tell me just one more thing, and I was kind of nodding off. And she came in and she started to say something to me, and I turned and opened my eyes and I looked at her, and she just kind of chuckled and she said, Mom, you always look at me like I'm just your favorite person in the whole world.
Wow. Yeah.
And, to be able to do that from almost a sleep state, and that just shows like the level of commitment. And
Mhm.
it's not easy, but in our case, my child responded to that. And again,
Mhm.
that's not with my words. I do say, I love you, you know, great job. Well, you worked really hard on this, or I really like the way you did. I mean, I do use my words, but it's how you show up. It's the body language and your facial expression. And we may think our kids are not noticing, but they are.
They're so attuned to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. They absorb us. Yeah. Um, the consciousness it takes, I think, to make that shift that you're talking about. And I want to come back to that. I want to just quickly sort of capture some pieces of that, that desire to be, not desire, impulse to be defensive, when they're attacking us. And I can totally relate to just being aware that my child was trying to provoke me. She'd be trying to sort of bait me. And I
Mhm.
think some of that is a way for them to discharge their discomfort, and that's what mom's going to get it. Or mom's going to
Yes.
be, they want mom to take responsibility. They want to shift it onto us and make it our fault somehow, which we do. I did that with my husband well into my 30s and 40s. He became that for me, and I had to get conscious of that to stop doing that. But that takes some maturity. And I just wanted to kind of give a tip to moms. Like, to me, that's, if we can change the what is getting telegraphed, if they're attacking us, if we can recognize that defensiveness as, again, an opportunity, that's an opportunity for me to reflect and give it back to her. Like you said, I can see you're hurting right now, or, oh, that sounds really painful for you. Do you want to tell me more about that? But not taking it on. As soon as we get defensive, we're we are making their strategy successful. right? We have
Right.
just taken responsibility for their experience. So
Hmm.
if you, it's just a little strategy there that if you can master that one, that can be really helpful. And also by not getting sucked in, you are modeling being in charge of your own experience. I don't get baited because I'm in charge of me. Yes. And our our kids need that. Um, being able to, as you are falling asleep at night, look at your daughter and telegraph to her that she's the most important person in the world to you takes a certain level of consciousness and maturity. I'm curious where you were with that prior to this experience with your daughter. Was that something you were doing on a regular basis before, do you think, or is that something that you developed through this experience?
I think that was something that I was already doing with both of my children. I think I remember reading something because my son is older. He's 22, almost 23 now. And when he was really young, I read something somewhere, a piece of advice that said that whatever your child brings to you and wants to talk to you about, be there for them in that conversation. So like, what does that look like? If he's 8 years old and he wants to talk about Minecraft, for 3 hours, do your very best to show up and express interest and be there in that space. Because when he's 8, the things that he wants to talk to you about are going to be very different from the things that he's going to want to talk to you about when he's 12 or 16
Mm,
or 20.
mm,
But if you
mhm,
establish that pattern of whatever is important to you is important to me. Like, I
mhm,
want to hear this. Yes, I will listen to you talk about Minecraft for 3 hours. Let's just go for a walk while we're doing that so I don't go completely insane. But so that was kind of a pattern that we had in our family. I feel like I had to really take it into high gear once this distress hit our family and hit my daughter. Um, because it's very easy to create that space and be loving and and be attuned and be attentive when everything's great and when you're happy and your kids happy and it's just another day and you're just doing the happy family thing. It's easy to do it then. When it becomes really hard is when your child is behaving in a way that you just don't really like, and it's okay to acknowledge that. I think it's important to acknowledge to yourself, I kind of don't like the way my kid is acting right now. I
mhm,
I kind of don't like this particular behavior or this particular thing she's doing. But that's not what's important in this moment. What's important is that I show her that no matter what, I love her and she's important to me. And I don't make my presence in our relationship conditional. Now,
yeah.
of
Oh,
course,
sorry.
if she's really coming at me and she's being super rude, which that very rarely happened, it's okay to say, I need a break. I'm gonna go away for a few minutes and then I'll come back and we can talk about this. I mean, I do think it's important that you show your child that there are limits
Mhm.
and that you can take a break if you really need to. Um, but I think that just in terms of the day to day relating to each other and being present no matter what, um, just doing what you can to be present in that relationship and to show them. Because a lot of people say that, we hear a lot of advice as parents of trans identified kids that connection is really the most important thing. I really loved what Maggie said about the relationship between you and your child, is the solvent that is going to dissolve these these issues or these.
Another way of saying becoming the mom your child needs you to be.
Right.
Hmm.
That that to me is more important than any amount of knowledge that you can have about gender ideology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because in a lot of ways, the gender stuff is kind of irrelevant. Um,
Hmm.
I think if you make that too much of the focus, um, and it's easy to do that because that's
Hmm.
the speeding truck, coming down the street to, to hurt your child. It's very easy to get drawn into that. But
Hmm.
if you get too focused on that, then you lose sight of what you can do in the day to day, and frankly, what your child really needs in the day to day.
In some ways, it almost sabotages you
Mhm.
to make that your focus because then you do get anxious at all these little signals, every time you hear the name, every time the child wants the haircut or wants to shop in the boys section or right, then it's going to bring up that anxiety and fear. Um, and that's going to get telegraphed. You also talk about creating that space where they feel embraced and your full presence when they are sharing something that is important to them. And this is like when adolescence hits and the things that they're sharing are more frightening for us, again, like that safety to be able to talk to us about them. And this is, I felt like I really blew it with my kid in this area where I made it unsafe for her to talk to me about the gender stuff. And that was something that if I could go back and do it again, I would ensure she felt like she could talk to me about all of it. Um, because I think it just makes sense that they're going to shut down around that. If what they're going to get every time they bring it up is an argument or us trying to persuade them of something, they're not going to feel safe to talk to us. And that is going to affect the attachment. There's no way around that. That as mom, ideally what we're creating is that sense of you can come to me with anything. I've got two questions on my mind. I'm trying to decide which one to go with first. Is your child is still trans identified? Is that true?
Um, that's a good question. Nominally, yes.
Okay.
I would say there over the past year, really, mm, maybe 9 months, there there's been a shift, definitely. Um, she's definitely holding on to things much less tightly
Hmm.
than she was. And as she's getting older and beginning to think critically, and think about her future in different ways, there's definitely been some loosening of her hold on some of the ideology.
Okay.
Definitely a shift.
What, how much of a role do you think your shift or your reorientation played in her loosening up her grip on the identity?
Well, I can only speculate on that, and maybe years
Hmm.
from now, she and I will be able to have a conversation where I can actually ask her that question myself. But I think it probably had a pretty big impact. I think about it a little bit as if in the beginning we were playing tug of war, and she was on one end of the rope and I was on the other,
Hmm.
and I kind of had to let go. I kind of had to stop holding the rope and not give her anything to push against or pull against. Um, because when you do that, you're just feeding the energy. You're giving oxygen to that fire, so to speak.
Hmm.
Um, and rather than engaging in that kind of push pull with her, um, I just had to put energy in other things. So much about gender's just like the surface stuff, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I came to realize that it really was not about the gender. It was about, okay, what's the underlying issue? What need is my daughter trying to meet? What
Mm-hmm.
problem is she trying to solve? What distress is she experiencing that she's trying to ease or manage? And
Mm-hmm.
if I can focus on those things, the distress, the need, the problem, and use my intuition as her mother and put my energy into that and essentially ignore the gender stuff. I mean, because we haven't had big, huge talks about gender. I don't share research with her. I don't tell her all the things that I've learned. We have lots of what I would call parallel conversations, kind of
Mm-hmm.
along more of critical thinking lines, but I have just kept my focus on what's the real source of her distress, what's the real source of the problem, what are the needs really, and let me do what I do best as her mother and put my energy into those things because I am her mother. I can see those perhaps more clearly than she can at her age. And so, when she wanted her room painted, I painted her room. When she wanted to get rid of the little girl bedding and get something more neutral, we did that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that was what's really going on underlying everything. Well, I don't want to be that little girl anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I look around at what's expected of me now as a 13, 14-year old. I don't like this and I'm scared and I'm not ready and I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
do this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I can understand that. I can recognize that. I
Yep.
can deal with that. I don't have to say, okay, well, that means you're a boy and let's transition you. But
Right.
I can recognize the realness of those problems and the sincerity of her distress, and I can work to meet those needs. And so that's what I did. And when she would begin to express interest in different things, again, I would just show up in that space where, okay, this is what we're doing now, and that's okay. Like she went through a process of for several months of wanting to um, get back into some of the interests that she had when she was younger, including collecting toys that she
Mm-hmm.
liked to play with when she was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, we got great at finding things on eBay, you know, because I recognized on some level that there was some need there, that she was thinking about her childhood and her girlhood in a different way and trying to process some of that stuff in a different way and even re-experience some of those things. Um, it wasn't just about the toys. It was about recapturing something
Mm-hmm.
that she had cast away and
Mm-hmm.
showing up in that space and saying, okay, like this is no big deal. Absolutely. You want to do this? We'll do this. Not
Mm-hmm.
making a big deal out of it, but just every time she would do that, again, like I said earlier, you want to reinforce the things that you feel are positive and are growth oriented um, and expansive.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, it just kind of grew. We went shopping for school clothes last year, and she started off looking at gender neutral things, and then she wanted to start trying on some more feminine things. And I said, okay, you can try on whatever you want. You look great in everything. This is cool. Inside you know, jumping up and down, but on the outside, I was like, okay, this is cool. And it just grew from there. Um, and I think when you can focus on those underlying needs, whatever those happen to be, you really help your child with this process. There's an analogy that I use that I share with some other parents. And one way to think about this is that when your child, we've all done the best that we can to give our children these wonderful, supportive, loving homes and these wonderful childhoods. But when they hit puberty, it is as though they have been thrown into the deep end of the ocean in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of a storm,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they're alone and they feel like they're drowning.
Mm-hmm.
And along comes this little piece of driftwood,
Mm-hmm.
and they cling on to it,
Yes.
as though their life depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
And from their perspective, it does.
Yes.
Now
Mm-hmm.
we look at this little piece of driftwood and we say, "Oh my gosh, it's a disaster. They're going to get hurt. It's full of splinters. They're going to drown anyway.
Mm-hmm.
This is not going to help them." And if our focus becomes on taking away that piece of driftwood, and we
Mm-hmm.
forget that our child is still in the ocean, our child is still in the middle of the storm, in the deep end, in the dark, and our child is scared. If we try to
Mm-hmm.
take that piece of driftwood away too soon, that's not going to work. We are going to be the enemy. And so
They're going
what
to
I
feel like we're drowning them.
yeah, and we're right in there with them, and it's
Mm-hmm.
all about fighting over this, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to get anywhere. But if what you can do instead is understand that my role is to lead my child to the shore.
Mm-hmm.
And once my child gets close enough to the shore that she can realize that if she just puts her feet down,
Mm-hmm.
she can stand up for herself on her own. She will be on solid ground. And then she won't need the driftwood anymore. She can let it go.
Mm. That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you.
That's the image that I try to tell myself. I tell myself that
Yeah.
story whenever I have doubts, whenever I ask myself, am I doing the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we don't. Sometimes we make mistakes. We
Absolutely. We're
word
human.
things we shouldn't, or we
Mm-hmm.
have a facial expression that's, not the kindest. And that's okay. That's
Mm-hmm. 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 They need
and
us to model being human too. Mm-hmm.
mhm, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
and they need to see that. Mom
Mm-hmm.
is trying. Mom is doing
Mm-hmm.
her best.
Yeah.
Sometimes mom gets mad and loses her cool, but if you repair and you reconnect, it's not about what you necessarily do in every moment of every day, but what have you done over weeks, over months, over
Mm-hmm.
years?
And that takes a certain capacity. You are developing yourself through that process. And that Viktor Frankl quote about when we can't change what's going on, what we can do is change ourselves. How do you think you have changed as a person? And what is life like for you now that is different than what it was before, maybe? What has this process invited you to develop in yourself?
I would say that my relationship with the idea of suffering
Mm,
has changed pretty
mhm,
profoundly. Um, I used to think of tests and difficulties and trials as, just a problem to solve. You just deal with it, face it head on, get through it, check off those boxes, and move on to the next thing, get back to the business of life.
mhm,
Um, and that was kind of how I was. I was very, you know, let's fix this. What is this? What is this about? Let's fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And until this happened, this was something I could not fix.
Right.
Um, and the distress that I felt, the anxiety I felt was unlike anything I have ever felt in my life. And I mean, even worse than when my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer and I became her caregiver through that process. There was a lot of suffering and a lot of difficulties in that. And, this was so much more than that, even. And I remember, especially in the early days, desperately wanting it to go away. I just wanted
Mm-hmm.
it to stop. The anxiety was so bad. I was like, I cannot be in my body. I cannot live in this body and feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
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 And just slowly realizing I'm going to have to figure out a way
Mm-hmm.
to do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for me, one of the things that was most helpful was shifting that understanding of suffering. And again, Frankel's book, I can't recommend it enough. It's just such a wonderful book. But when he says that suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of saying, why is this happening to me? Or why is this happening to my family? Or how can I make this stop? After thrashing around that way for weeks and even months, finally just stopping and saying, okay, what am I meant to learn from this? How can I make meaning out of this? If this situation is to serve me in some purpose, then what is that? And how can I mine this experience for the gems
Mm-hmm.
that it holds for me? And once you can shift your perspective in that way, like, what am I meant to learn? What is in this that is meant to benefit me? And who am I going to be as a result of this? And what kind of person am I going to be on the other side of this? You can almost get a little excited. That may
Mm-hmm.
sound kind of crazy, but it just shifts your whole perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is what is so empowering, because rather than seeing yourself as the victim of something that you didn't ask for that just landed in your lap on top of your family, you can say, where is the opportunity in this for me to be the person that I always had it within me to be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because that's the purpose of these tests and trials, you know. And that perspective is what has buoyed me through some of these really difficult moments. And I think it's important to show that to our kids too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, COVID happened. We had plans. We
Mm-hmm.
had things we were going to do. My son was
Mm-hmm.
supposed to go off to college. We were supposed to do this. We were supposed to do that. All of that blew up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so what do we do now?
Yeah, in your graduation reflection, you said, acceptance doesn't mean we're going to be stuck here forever. It just means here is where we are right now. This is the starting point. And now I can reclaim the energy and resources I was investing in resistance and put them to better use in moving the ball forward and doing what I can through love, wisdom, intuition, patience, and trust to shepherd my daughter through her exploration.
That's it right there.
There it is.
And for me, realizing the enormous amount of energy that I was putting into resistance. I don't like this. this should not be happening. How do I make it stop? It left nothing. I didn't have anything left to really engage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't like sports metaphors too much. I'm not a sporty person, but I love that idea that acceptance is really just saying, this is where the play starts.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the line of scrimmage is. If I can have the most complicated, wonderful plan for the play, but if I'm arguing over the line of scrimmage, then we never get to play. We never get to start.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, one of the things was realizing that's what acceptance is. Acceptance
Mm-hmm.
isn't, oh, well, we're just going to be here forever. It's,
Right.
this is where we're starting. And
And
then,
it's not accepting that my kid is transgender, even. I think a
right,
lot of moms get confused about that. It's just accepting it requires some grief. You've got to grieve what you don't get, that vision of what you thought it was going to be like. Once you can experience the sadness and disappointment, that's an important part of the process. We have to let that up and out. We've got to cry. We've got to drop into our tears of sadness, and experience that futility.
yeah,
But what comes on the other side is this reorientation and this new energy and even excitement, like you said. If you start orienting to the obstacle as the way, suddenly these things, you see the opportunity in
right.
the difficulties life will throw at you. Hmm.
And you can even be grateful for them, which,
Hmm.
can sound really crazy, but if you are viewing them as an opportunity for growth, um, that's what they are. And you can
Hmm.
certainly be grateful for that.
Hmm. Hmm. And it changes the way you're doing life. Yes. And makes it more fun.
It does. And,
Hmm.
you asked, how have I changed? I think my relationship with fear
Mm.
has changed as well. Um,
Yes, please
because
say
one of the
more.
things that I had to grapple with was how afraid I was. And, I think there's this tendency to to sort of associate fear as a negative emotion and to want to push it away or squash it or push it down, make it go away.
Hmm.
But in my experience, the more we resist our
Hmm.
feelings, the stronger they get, the louder they get.
Hmm.
And so, what I did over a period of time was just really sit with my fear and say, okay, what is it I'm really afraid of? Is it that I'm really afraid that my daughter's going to do this thing to her body? Well, okay. What if she does that thing to her body? Then what?
Hmm. Hmm.
Then
Hmm.
what? And then what? And then what? And it's a bit like peeling an onion. You just keep going and going and going and going. And what I realized was the thing that I was afraid of was that something was going to happen that I wouldn't be able to cope with.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I thought, well, okay. In all of my life and all of my experiences and everything that has ever happened to me, has there ever been something I couldn't cope with? And the honest answer was no. Maybe I needed some new skills. Maybe I needed to take some time and learn how to think about something differently. But there was never anything that came along that I couldn't cope with or move on and move through, because that's what humans do. That's what we do. We adapt, we problem solve, we find solutions, we learn and we grow, and we just keep doing that. And so once I realized that that's what I was really afraid of, then I didn't have to be afraid of that anymore, because I could trust myself
Hmm.
that no matter what came along, we'll figure it out. My daughter will
Yes.
figure it out. My husband
Uh-huh.
will figure it out. My son
Uh-huh.
will all figure it out. And I don't have to have everything all planned out. I don't have to have all the answers right now. I don't have to be able to see around every corner and anticipate every scary thing that's ever going to happen, because that's impossible. And if that's my job, not only am I going to drive myself crazy, but I'm going to drive everybody around me crazy too. And then you're letting the air out.
Yes.
You're taking some of the oxygen away from all of that, and then you have room to breathe and be in the moment.
And that when I talk about faith, that's that's the faith I'm talking about. That's what humans do. We figure things out, you
Yeah.
know. You said it beautifully here. I want to share just a quick little quote from something else that I have on my wall. What is ultimately feared, and there's a Stoic that says something similar to this. I forget which one it is, but what is ultimately feared is an uncomfortable sensation in the body, not the world itself, but how the world makes us feel. And that's what I'm hearing you describing. And when you took yourself through that process of, and then what, and then what, and then what, that is, the Stoics also encourage making peace with worst case scenarios. That's what you were doing. That's what that process is. And then in your reflection here, you say, just knowing that I can turn my little sailboat into the wind, that I can face the storm and come out okay on the other side, that's hugely empowering and exactly what I want to model for my daughter.
Absolutely.
Well, what a lovely conversation. It's always a pleasure to get to talk with you. We are all so blessed to have you in the community on the leadership team. You definitely have a reputation among the moms of just having this quiet, powerful wisdom, that you have such a beautiful way of articulating, and we're just so incredibly grateful to have you as part of that community. Thank you for being in there and for taking on the leadership role that you do in there. We all appreciate you.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to work with you and be a part of the community. I gained so much from everyone there, and it's just such a supportive, empowering, growth-oriented place to be. It feels so good to be there and to be with moms who are engaged in this work and supporting and lifting up each other. It's wonderful. And thank you for creating that space.
You've been listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. If you're interested in connecting with other moms who are seeking to resource themselves and support each other to grow through the most difficult things life will throw at us, we invite you to consider joining us in the SMP Online Community Center. This is a private, vetted community created specifically for moms who share this circumstance. For more information and to express interest in joining, please visit the SMP Community Center tab at stoicmom.substack.com to learn more, or simply fill out the application included in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and always remember, humans have amazing capacity for overcoming adversity and healing. And I'm pretty sure you're human.